I want to start by basically saying that as we're looking at the future, it's an interesting scenario, interesting exercise, looking at these stats here, like from the World Economic Forum, right? The risks have gotten worse since the start of the COVID crisis. That is a huge list, right? Social cohesion, livelihood, climate action failure, mental health deterioration, and Bill was mentioned that earlier. It's an ongoing list. If it was complete, it would go down to the bottom of the screen, yeah, all the way down beyond the screen, I suppose. But really what that means is that we have more and more issues that have come to the surface, and I think it's really important to realize that we are definitely at this fork of the road moment discussed by Buckminster Fuller, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago. This is the trigger moment. We're at the pivot point of the exponential scale here, right? Which means that we're taken off for 816 and beyond that, and it's really important as we go this, and I call this a perma-change. It's a kind of a word that I made up, but I think it fits really well. Bill calls it in his book, The Global Mega Crisis. I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic on this and talk about perma-change, permanent change, or permanent VUCA, you could say. That is basically in the cards for the next 10 years. We've got to be prepared for this. We have to collaborate, and we have to set priorities in a different way than we've been doing all along. And another really important graph here as we're looking at this, right? Do young people feel optimistic about the future? No, they don't. If you take a look at these stats, right? People have failed to care for the planet. The future is frightening. And especially down, if you look at the where that's happening, the southern part of the hemisphere, right? The Philippines, Brazil, India, right? A lot of confusion about this, where that's going and what the next step is. And then we have lots of people quitting. You can see here, of course, the Randstad Work Monitor, that a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds, right, would rather be unemployed than to be unhappy in a job. That's also quite different than before COVID. And the same goes here, of course, for people saying they've quit a job because they didn't fit their personal life and they weren't happy with it. So a really important realization here. At the same time, of course, as we're doing this, machines are getting smarter at a very rapid rate. So artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, all that stuff that's happening around us, I call those the game changers, right? Look at this stat. I have a lot of stats today, I just realized, but exponential cost reduction, right? So things are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper in technology, which means that we're facing the fact that machines are getting smart, not smart in the human sense by any means of imagination, but they're no longer stupid, right? Deep learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that's what it's all about, learning like a machine, right? And that really means for me that we're moving into a world where it's quite awesome what's happening with technology. This is the computational capacity of supercomputers basically becoming almost limitless very soon. DNA computing, how we can actually use DNA to solve cancer and other diseases, cost per megabase of human genome going towards zero. The green economy is exploding with exponential change here, whether it's clean building materials or battery storage or precision agriculture and so on. And here, right, 5 multi-trillion-dollar innovation platforms. This is from ARK Investments, this slide, right? It's like everything is there, and here's, of course, the catch here, right? In the end, we can safely say that we will have all the tools, the science and the technology, but we're short of telos, the Greek word, purpose, right? And that, of course, relates to consciousness. Yeah, we're short of consciousness. We're not short of tools, but we have all the tools we need. And we have to actually get around to using them correctly. I think it's also Buckminster Fuller who said that humanity is inventing all the right technology, but then ends up using it for the wrong reasons. So this is, of course, the key question. And how do we build that? How do we create consciousness that goes beyond this? How do we pursue this kind of idea of multilateral cooperation, a kind of new globalism, and a holistic viewpoint of society? This is what Bill's book is all about. This is what my book was all about, or is all about, Technology versus Humanity. You can check it out in the end. But basically, this is a really important part, right? How do we create consciousness? How do we make that happen? How do we respond to this in a different way? I think the response to the perma-change really is about global consciousness. Working together, finding a holistic purpose, people, planet, purpose, and prosperity, as I like to call it. And this is really what it's all about in the end. So this is really the toughest mission right now is to reach that, because, as Bill says in the book, everything beyond knowledge is about consciousness. And this is where we're going. This is why our kids need to be more conscious and aware, more creative, more human, more android rhythms, as I like to say, than just learning information and downloading information for later. This is why education needs to change. And I'll give you some examples here of artificial intelligence. I think you've seen in the news the last couple of days, DALL-E, right? This is an engine made by OpenAI. You can download the code and build your own app there if you wish. But basically, you can type in and say, I want women and birds flying high with the sun in the sky as an oil painting, right? And the AI makes the painting. Right? So it could do all of this pretty mind-boggling stuff. And here's the same example. The computer LAN party of the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper, painting as an oil painting. This is what the AI comes up with, right? It generates images that were never seen before. In a way, you could say that the AI is becoming kind of a designer, right? Of course, lacking consciousness regardless of that, but this is what's happening with AI. Dali and Kevin Kelly said, and many others, machines are for answers, humans are for questions. Right? I think Ariana Huffington once said, algorithms know the logic of everything, but the feeling of nothing. And there is a difference. That points towards our future job, what we're going to do in the future. So basically here we have a change of technology. The way that we're going with this is where all of a sudden we have to ask the question where the destination is, the human revolution, both technology as well as humanity. And in the end, we have this scenario around us where technology is absolutely everywhere. We call this the Neo-Luvian man, right? And woman, of course, right? Surrounded by AI and the game changers. But then again, what really matters to us is actually quite different than this. And these are what I call the human-only traits: emotions, creativity, consciousness, right? Imagination. And this is really what my book was about. I realized inadvertently when I was reading Bill's book how close that was to the interpretation that we have in common, their consciousness and human imagination. You want me to go back to some slides? I can do that. I can definitely do that. Hang on just 1 second. Sorry about this sound issue, right? I guess I will maybe go back to the DALL-E slides. Okay. So I talked about this earlier when the voice was disrupted, but basically the examples from DALL-E, you could see that on YouTube. Woman and birds flying high as an oil painting, and the AI just makes a new picture. The same goes, of course, for this one, with the computer LAN party of the Last Supper painting as an oil painting. You can see all that stuff on Twitter and YouTube. It's quite obvious. And so just to recap really quickly on this, the machines being for answers, humans are for questions. This is, of course, a very, very old topic, right? Kevin Kelly talked about that a lot in his book, what algorithms are good at, what we are good at. I think ultimately as humans, we have a lot more intelligence that can't really be described very easily. That has to do, of course, with human agency and consciousness. We shall debate later. Here are the revolutions. I talked about this already, so I'm going to skip this part. But basically, we're going into a revolution that is beyond technology. We're going into a revolution that is about the next level of humanity, and that is both technological as well as philosophical, right? And it's about this idea of creating a destination where we're going in our human revolution. And I will have a lot more shows on that in the very near future. The Neo-Luvian man, you can find that a lot in my work, surrounded by technology, but in the end, what really matters for us is not technology, it's not data, it's not the IoT, it's all the stuff that makes us human, the human-only trait, consciousness, right, and human agency. That's really what it's all about for us. And this is partly why we have to move into the future, getting away from this machine thinking of efficiency. Right? It's no longer about efficiency, because we can go efficient in the wrong direction, right? And that still wouldn't do any good for us. So we have to think about different things in efficiency. That brings me back to the pyramid that Bill also used. I have my own pyramid, of course, superimposed over these pretty cool robots here. I'll bring that in a second. So here's my pyramid, and I think this is basically where we're going up the food chain. The lower part of this, intellectual knowledge, logic, data information, and deeper knowledge. That's kind of computer territory now, right? Basically machine turf, as I would say. And on top of that, we have what I call the human turf, the meat space, right? Which is for us, the humans. And I think this is where we're going. And on top of that, of course, is quite logically consciousness and human agency. Right? This is a whole different place that we have to get used to filling. And this is also how we're going to change our education. And if you have kids, you got to think about that. How do you teach your kids human agency and consciousness? Not such an easy mission, I suppose. Anyway, going back to my film, you see in the beginning of that, The Good Future, goodfuturefilm.com. I think global consciousness is the ticket to the good future. And it came to me as I was reading, now that this kind of joins together very nicely with the thoughts contained in my film, The Good Future Film. I also have a new one called The Good Future Explained. You can just Google for that. Great quote here from my compatriot, Leonardo da Vinci: study the science of art as study the art of science. Learn how to see. Last sentence, most important, realize that everything connects to everything else. And I think this is so important to put that in the middle of our work. Everything connects to everything else. And this is, of course, something that requires consciousness.